Introducing God's Plan, Chapter 5, Joseph in the Land of Egypt. Jacob had 12 sons, but one of these sons he loved more than all the others. His name was Joseph. He gave Joseph a beautiful cloak of many colours to wear, which Joseph was very pleased with. Joseph's older brothers did not like him being their father's favourite son, and they became very jealous of Joseph and hated him. One day, when Joseph was 17, he had a dream which he told his brothers about. He dreamed they were all binding sheaves of grain together. Suddenly his sheaf stood up straight, while all their sheaves gathered around and bowed down to his. Another day, Joseph had another dream, which he also told his brothers. He dreamed the sun, the moon, and the 11 stars were bowing down to him. When he told his father this dream, Jacob told him off and asked whether he really thought that one day his mother and his father and his brothers would actually bow down to him. Joseph had no way of knowing that this would, in fact, come true, and it was all part of God's plan for both him and all his family. A short while later, Jacob sent Joseph to his brothers, who were away from home out in the fields, looking after the animals. They were looking after Jacob's flocks of sheep, and he wanted to check that all was well with them. When they saw him coming, they planned to kill him. But Reuben, the eldest brother, persuaded them not to kill him. He suggested that instead they throw him into a large hole in the ground. Just after they did this, they noticed some foreign men riding by on their way to Egypt with spices to sell. So the brothers decided to sell Joseph as a slave to these men. They took the money, and poor Joseph became a slave and was taken to Egypt to work. Joseph's brothers dipped his cloak in goat's blood and took it to their father Jacob. When he saw it, he thought that Joseph had been killed by a wild animal and was very sad. When Joseph arrived in Egypt, an officer of Pharaoh, the king, called Potiphar, decided to buy him as a slave for himself. Potiphar was a very rich man, and he had everything he wanted. God was with Joseph in everything he did. When Potiphar realized this and saw how successful Joseph was in managing everything he was given to do, Potiphar put him in charge of his whole household. But Potiphar had a wicked wife, and she lied about Joseph to her husband. And Potiphar believed her, and he threw Joseph into prison. However, God was still with Joseph even when he was in prison. The man in charge of the prison came to trust Joseph and put him in charge of all the other prisoners. Some time later, Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, sent his chief cupbearer and his chief baker to prison for displeasing him. Joseph was put in charge of them too. One night, they both had dreams, and in the morning Joseph asked why they looked so sad. It was because no one could tell them what their dreams meant. Joseph told them God knew and asked them to tell him their dreams. The cupbearer dreamed that he squeezed the juice from a bunch of grapes into Pharaoh's cup and put the cup in Pharaoh's hand. Joseph told him this meant that he would get his old job back. He also asked the cupbearer to mention him to Pharaoh when he was working for him again. In this way, Joseph hoped to be freed from prison. Joseph also told the baker what his dream meant. He had dreamed that birds were eating out of baskets of bread on his head. Joseph told him that this meant that Pharaoh was going to kill him. Everything happened just as Joseph had said. But the cupbearer forgot all about Joseph once he was free again, and he didn't mention him to Pharaoh, as Joseph had hoped. 2 years later, the Pharaoh of Egypt had 2 dreams, and he didn't know what they meant. And he was very troubled by his dreams, and he asked many people whether they could interpret them for him, but no one could give him an answer. Then one day the cupbearer remembered that there was a man called Joseph in prison who would be able to tell the Pharaoh what his dreams meant. And so Joseph was taken to the palace, and he stood before the Pharaoh of Egypt himself. Pharaoh told Joseph about his 2 dreams. In his first dream, there were 7 very fat and lovely cows, And then 7 very thin and ugly cows came along and ate up the 7 fat cows. In his second dream, there were 7 good and healthy ears of corn. And then 7 thin and scorched ears of corn grew up and swallowed the 7 healthy ears of corn. God had given Joseph the ability to interpret dreams, and so he knew straight away what these dreams meant. He told Pharaoh that there would be 7 very good years of harvests for the farmers. There would be lots of corn and plenty of everything for everyone to eat. But this would be followed by 7 years of famine. These 7 years would be very bad, and everyone would be hungry, because nothing would grow very well at all. Joseph also told Pharaoh what he needed to do to prepare for the 7 years of famine. Pharaoh was very pleased that Joseph knew what his dreams meant, and he rewarded him. He put him in charge of his palace and the whole land of Egypt, and he made Joseph his second in command. Joseph worked hard for the Pharaoh and the people of Egypt over the next 7 years. Pharaoh allowed Joseph to do what he thought was best. Joseph built huge barns and told everyone in the land of Egypt to save a portion of their harvests for the next 7 years. They were to store this away for the 7 years of famine, when little food would grow. The people did as Joseph said and saved a lot of food, and they stored it all away. At last the 7 years of famine came. Everyone in the lands around Egypt became very hungry. However, the people in Egypt were not hungry, as they'd saved their food and because Joseph had told them to. Many people came to Egypt to try to buy food, and among these were Joseph's 10 older brothers, who came from the land of Canaan. They were also very hungry, and they came to get some food to take back to Jacob, their father. When Joseph's brothers arrived in Egypt, they did not recognize Joseph. They had sold him when he was only 17 years old, and now he was a man of 44. He was also the most important person in Egypt after Pharaoh. The brothers bowed down low to Joseph with their faces to the ground and asked him to sell them some food. And so Joseph's dream of many years ago came true. His brothers bowed down to him, although they didn't know that it was Joseph. Joseph, however, did recognize his brothers and gave them the grain that they asked for, and he also told them that if they returned to Egypt, they were to bring their youngest brother, Benjamin, with them. The next year, the second year of the famine, they had to return to get more food, and so they brought Benjamin with them. Once again, they bowed down before Joseph without realizing who he was. Joseph gave them the grain they asked for, but he also hid his silver cup in Benjamin's bag. When the brothers set off for home, Joseph sent his servant to overtake them and search their bags. The cup was found, and Joseph commanded that Benjamin should stay and become his slave. For the third time, the brothers threw themselves to the ground in front of Joseph and pleaded that they should be his slaves as well. They could not bear to go home to their father without Benjamin. Jacob still thought that Joseph was dead, and Benjamin, the very youngest brother, was now his most beloved son. If Benjamin didn't return home, they knew their father would die of grief. Joseph could see that after all these years, his brothers had changed. No longer were they jealous as they once had been, but they wished to protect their youngest brother and to keep him safe, even if it meant that they had to be slaves themselves. Joseph forgave his brothers for all their past wickedness. He told them who he was, and at first they couldn't believe he was really Joseph. Joseph told them not to be afraid, as God had been with them all these years. God had planned that he should go to Egypt so that he could help save many lives, including theirs, so that the people of Israel would survive. It was God who had sent Joseph his dreams of his brothers bowing down to him many years ago, and it was God who had made sure that everything had happened to save the people of Israel from dying during the famine. Joseph then asked them to go back and get their father and bring him to live in Egypt. And so his brothers went back to Canaan and brought Jacob to Egypt. And Jacob was overjoyed to see Joseph again after thinking for so many years that he was dead. He was delighted to see that his favourite son was really alive and that he hadn't been killed by a wild animal after all. So all of Jacob's family, the people of Israel, came to live in Egypt. There they had plenty to eat, and they were treated well by the Egyptians. They had many children, and these children had many children themselves. And so the nation of Israel, which started with Abraham, gradually got very large, and all of these people lived in Egypt.